After the disastrous Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, only one isolated atoll prevents an enemy invasion of Hawaii. This is Midway Island, the scene of the most decisive Pacific battle of World War II. Navy pilot Robert Elder was flying here. So was Second Lieutenant Taisuke Maruyama. This is where their paths would cross, on the battlefront. It's June 2nd, 1942. An American patrol plane flies reconnaissance over an isolated atoll in the Central Pacific, 650 miles from Japan. Midway Island has been turned into a military base and is inhabited only by American armed forces. Midway is vitally important because of its strategic location. It's the key to prevent a Japanese invasion of Hawaii. At this point in the war, the Japanese Navy is dominating the entire Pacific. The United States is in desperate need of a major victory to smash the myth of Japanese invincibility. Holding on to Midway is a must. Runways have been built and squadrons have been transported by naval carriers. One of those flyers was Robert M. Elder.
I came in as a Naval Reserve in 1941, and we were used as an auxiliary air group to when as required, either by squadrons or by the group or whatever is needed. Just before Midway, we were ordered to relieve Air Group 5 on the Yorktown.
The carrier Ensign Elder was assigned to had just limped back to Pearl Harbor, damaged by a successful Japanese torpedo hit in the Battle of the Coral Sea. This kind of victory had buoyed the Japanese combined fleet. Commander-in-Chief Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto is convinced that Japan must and can win the war within the first year. He's also certain that if he can destroy the American fleet in a decisive battle, the war is won. The Japanese hope to do this by drawing out the Americans to defend Midway Island. The objectives call for a diversionary attack on the Aleutian Islands, the invasion of Midway, and luring the American fleet into a final battle. A powerful force is hastily assembled at ports in and around Japan. Spearheading the fleet is an advanced expeditionary force of submarines. An armada of aircraft carriers follows. "19-year-old Taisuke Maruyama was a second lieutenant flying a torpedo plane from the Japanese carrier Hiryu.
Before Midway, all our big attacks like Pearl Harbor were successful. So I was sure the Midway tactic would succeed as well.
What the Japanese don't know is that American cryptologists have broken their code and are fully aware of the enemy's intentions. The American Pacific Fleet High Command, headed by Admiral Chester Nimitz, moves all the naval and air power it can into the area. After the Japanese are located by the land-based Midway forces, they are to be hit by planes from the hidden American carriers. Task Force 16, comprising the last two operational carriers, the USS Hornet and Enterprise, are redirected to Midway at top speed. Meanwhile, the torpedo-damaged Yorktown is assessed with a repair time of 90 days. But there's no time for delay. Every available body is called into service. 1,400 workers are incredibly able to complete the job in just 2 days.
The day the Yorktown came out of the harbor, we joined her, landed aboard, and went directly on out to Midway. We did scouting missions on the way up there, of course, but they wanted to keep as few flights in the air as possible so that there wasn't any giveaway on our position.
May 31st, the American task force has reached its position 300 miles northeast of Midway. The officers and men are told an attack for the purpose of capturing Midway is expected.
We were in for a major engagement. How large, we did not know. We could anticipate meeting odds that were anything but favorable to us.
Japanese troops proceed as well with much confidence, but little information.
In my position, it was not something that we could know. Stuff like that, it was above my rank. So our job was to fight whenever they wanted us to fight.
June 3rd, a lone Catalina bomber from Midway spots the Japanese invasion transport. The report is radioed in, and a flight of B-17s are ordered out. The first encounter scores little damage to the Japanese fleet. At 4:30 a.m., June 4th, the Japanese launched their attack against the Midway atoll, only 240 miles distance. The first wave of planes leaves from the flight decks of Japanese carriers Kaga, Hiryu, Soryu, and Akagi. Although forewarned of the raid, 26 Marine fighters are no match for the superior Japanese Zeros. The ground forces have to throw everything they've got at the attacking Japanese fighters. The battle for Midway has begun. The Japanese strike has devastating results, and they are so certain of victory, they don't bother to bomb the airstrip, which they intend to use after the island is taken. The attack on Midway Island is relentless and appears to succeed according to Japanese plan. Once they have immobilized the Americans, they will invade and capture Midway. June 4th, 7 a.m. Torpedo planes crowd the flight decks of the 4 Japanese carriers preparing for a second bombing run on Midway Island. While flyers are given their orders, bombs are substituted for torpedoes. But now, the American fleet springs its trap.
We got the information that the Japanese had hit in force at Midway and had made a very aggressive attack there. And the decision was made jointly to press home an attack on the best knowledge we had, which is, at that time, began to close in to be accurate. We launched, loaded with 1,000-pound delayed action fuses, some armor-piercing. An hour and 20 minutes out, we spotted for the first time the 3 carriers of the 4 that were known to be in the area.
On the way back from Midway Island, in the air, they told all the pilots there was a group of American planes heading to attack the ship. But until then, I had no idea that the Americans would ever appear.
American torpedo planes arrive and attack 3 of the Japanese carriers.